If you struggle with scarcity and lack, even when life looks fine on the outside, this episode is going to help you understand how those patterns might actually be rooted in your core wound. So, if you've ever felt that something was wrong with you, maybe that you're not enough, you're unlovable, unwanted, powerless, invisible, we're going to explore how those core wounds shape your experience of scarcity and lack. In the last episode, we explored some key themes around scarcity and lack. We talked about how scarcity isn't only about missing external resources, but an inner atmosphere of insufficiency shaped by trauma. We talked about how when the nervous system learns to expect disappointment, instability, deprivation, it starts to brace, to grip, to guard, to withhold, to self isolate, and to control in order to feel safe. And I clarify that these patterns aren't personal failures, they're protective adaptations shaped by the unresolved pain and unsafety. We also looked at how manifestation culture doesn't heal this at the roots because mindset work stays at the level of the conscious mind, while the deeper wound is still very much living in the body, in the heart, in the subconscious, and in the soul. We also talked about underneath scarcity, there's often something much more vulnerable. That's the sorrow, helplessness, shame, fear, longing, agony, or unmet needs. That's the part that we really don't want to feel. So that's how scarcity is actually a protection stance that can leave you stuck in the very conditions that you're trying to prevent. It can leave you feeling cut off from fuller receiving of abundance and actualizing your potential. If you haven't heard the last episode, listen to that one before this one because today we're going to go deeper. In this episode, I want to help you discover a deeper truth that scarcity isn't just a condition you're living in, it's actually woven into your identity. We're going to explore how your story of scarcity is actually connected to your core wound. Because once scarcity becomes identity, no matter of external change fully lands. And that's what we have to go deeper. As I mentioned last episode, the deepest sting of any story of scarcity and lack is often the conclusion that we draw about ourselves. But that story was never really ours to begin with. We were just conditioned to believe it is. The conclusion about who we are actually comes from a much earlier imprint that usually we don't even remember from before we had words. And eventually, it becomes a phrase that we tell ourselves over and over again about what it all means about us. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is where scarcity meets your core wound, why lack becomes identity. When abundance becomes medicine for scarcity. Before we go and look at the map of the common core wounds, I want to show you how this has emerged in my own life. Last episode, we were exploring the scarcity and lack underlying both the struggle to manifest what you want and what often drives people to use manifestation as a coping mechanism instead of doing the deeper work. And I spoke a little bit about my struggle with that aspect. I encouraged you to ask a different question instead of, why do I experience scarcity? I suggested, what does scarcity help me avoid feeling? Because that's what starts to uncover the core wound, which was imprinted at conception. Then that same emotional and energetic imprint is reinforced through life experiences, which we use as evidence to support the conclusion that we were conditioned to believe about who we are. I've introduced the topic of the core wound during this new season of the podcast, particularly in episode 4, where I shared the process of how I transmuted my core wound into medicine. And I discovered that we can do this by recognizing the ancestor who birthed the pattern that we inherited, then changing the ancestral agreement that was keeping it in place in the lineage. Because the core wound is an inherited ancestral agreement. For me, that ancestral agreement was, I don't exist. And the undertone was a fear so big, I named it terror. That was my core wound that I spent an entire lifetime trying not to feel. And I had already identified that about a year before the big breakthrough. Before that, I had done a lot of research on core wounds. I tried to identify, reprogram it, and heal it in other ways, none of which worked. And it wasn't until that day in the sauna last year when my left hip was aching, when I had the revelation that the core wound each of us carries feels very personal, yet it's actually inherited. It comes from an unresolved wound that one of our ancestors experienced, which got frozen in the lineage. That's why we can't heal it on our own. It's not ours alone. And we'll get deeper into the layers of healing the core wound in other episodes. But first, we need the awareness of what it is. The core wound exists in the ancestral field, a relational field that connects everyone in the lineage. This is why it needs to be healed in that relational field. This is also why I've been saying that trauma healing work can only go so far when it's about me, my pain, my trauma. The massive transformation that takes place when we shift out of the self-centered focus and into healing as an act of service, one that benefits ourselves and is also a contribution to others. That's the win-win. And that's a really different paradigm than the early stages of recovery after narcissistic abuse, when we just want to feel better about what happened and stop it from happening again. And if we're really honest with ourselves, at that point in the journey, our entire worldview was self centered. And that's a protective mechanism, a self protection mechanism that served its purpose, but then became an obstacle to healing and living in abundance. So it wasn't until that day in the sauna when I realized that my core wound came from my grandmother's sister who took her own life when she was a teenager. The family erased her, burned the photos, forbade anyone to talk about her and what happened. And that wasn't out of malevolence. That's just how my great grandparents tried to deal with the trauma and loss by not dealing with the trauma and loss. So it was like Graciela, Grace, didn't exist. It felt as though her soul was trapped in that state of non existence for exactly 100 years and 1 month. The unresolved grief lingered in the ancestral field. Everyone was trapped in that in some way. So you can hear the tone of scarcity and lack underneath that core wound. I don't exist. It was a lack of existence. But remember, it wasn't just mine. That was like an energetic knot in the ancestral field affecting everyone in my mom's lineage, even though probably no one realized. We often assume that our wounds are just life because it's all we know. And my mom later told me that she always felt a strong connection to Grace's story too, because my mom had the same core wound. And that's why she was able to heal so much after I transmuted that wound for myself and the lineage. I had so much more compassion for her when I realized she was carrying the same pain. And I had unknowingly amplified that wound in the field and in her when I cut her out of my life years ago. I had unintentionally recreated the scarcity and lack both in my relationship with her as well as in my relationship with myself, with other people, all the while trying to protect myself from scarcity and lack. I had been trapped in that loop. And it's not wrong to set boundaries when someone's hurting you. But what I'm saying is that sometimes the ways that we try to protect ourselves serve a purpose, but then end up amplifying the core wound as well as the state of scarcity and lack. And when I restored the abundance of existence, I no longer had that visceral feeling of constant fear and terror that had haunted me my entire life. Things that happened since then that normally would have triggered me and made me collapse into the fear of non-existence or having to fight for my existence suddenly just became so easy to resolve. a simple conversation without the emotional hijacking, a decision of knowing what's aligned for me and what's not without needing to fight to assert my existence. And as that old wound softened, the gift within it began to emerge. That's the medicine. And in my case, the medicine was literally grace. Not just my ancestor's name, but a sense of divine grace that I'd never felt before. It began to permeate and grow in every aspect of my life where there was once the pain of scarcity and lack of existence. The medicine that emerges from the wound can be any kind of gift or virtue. It's unique to each person, though, of course, there's common patterns between us because we're all part of the same human collective. That's the shift from scarcity and lack into true abundance, from the wound to the medicine. And that's not the kind of abundance that we try to manifest as a coping mechanism to cover up the pain. That's transmuting the pain. This kind of abundance doesn't come from the ego, the personal willpower, or forcing anything. It's just the natural result of a transmutation process. And within a few months after that, I saw the miracles that the medicine of grace was creating, not just in my own life, but with my mom. Now our relationship is full of grace. Instead of the old pain, lack, and defensiveness, we're actually able to connect without triggering one another in a trauma loop. She's having massive insights, revelations, and breakthroughs about herself, her patterns in her own life. And I'm so happy for her because I love to see her hopeful, stepping into her freedom and authenticity for the first time in her life. And what's even more amazing is that the medicine isn't just limited to our lineage. Once we tap into it, it becomes the new energetic tone of who we are. You can probably sense that the transmission of my message nowadays is quite different than it was years ago. And that's not to invalidate the existence of who I was. She was part of my journey, right? It's normal to want to stay in the victimhood, in the resentment, in the injustice, and that tone is really sticky. I was there for a long time. There's familiarity and a comfort there, even though it really sucks. There's a payoff for maintaining the status quo, but life wants to evolve. That's why what's unresolved keeps looping back around generation after generation, and it continues to get worse over time so that it gets our attention until one day, maybe someone in the lineage wakes up and decides to be the generational cycle breaker. And if you're resonating with this, that's probably you in your family. And I understand this new direction may not resonate with everyone, and that's okay. I'm holding space here for the grief and for the new possibilities that emerge when someone feels ready for that path. When we step into a lineage, by birthright, we inherit the unmetabolized burdens of those who came before us and also their gifts. But it's very common that the gifts get buried and forgotten underneath the layers of the pain. The wound isn't the enemy. Each wound contains the codes for the medicine. So once we transmute the wound, we can start to tap into the medicine, and then we can start to discover how that medicine wants to express itself through our daily purpose walk, in our soul's mission, and through our sacred offering. So, how is your struggle with scarcity and lack related to your core wound? When there are unresolved patterns in our lineage, the next generations inherit them, not as a punishment, but as a continuation of responsibility to those who came before us, to those who gave us life. And that responsibility is also an opportunity for regeneration and restoration. When we transmute the core wound into medicine, we offer those same codes to our ancestors and to all of our living relatives. if their soul wants to tap into the possibility of liberation. And of course, each soul has free will. So some might choose to stay stuck. But for those souls who are ready to heal and evolve, it's not even something we have to talk about because the medicine just becomes available in the morphogenic field of the DNA. In episode 4 last year, I gave a brief outline about the dominant and recessive core wounds, how you have one from each side of your lineage, from your mom and your dad. Don't worry about that yet. We're going to swing back around to go deeper into that topic down the road in another episode. But today we're specifically going to look at the bigger pattern of the scarcity tone underlying all core wounds. No matter what your core wound is, it's got a scarcity pattern under there. And that's also the scarcity pattern of your ancestry. So, whatever comes up for you today and afterward as a result of this episode will probably be your dominant core wound. That tends to be the one we discover first, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way for each person. So, don't overthink it. For now, just go with what's coming up. The core wound is also a really big topic. It's way too big for one episode, but it's also very important. So I want to honor it with the space and the gradual revelation that the topic deserves, which will also give you the time and the space to allow your own insights and revelations to emerge layer by layer. So I want to help you illuminate how your struggle with scarcity and lack could be related to your core wound. And while the core wound always has a tone of scarcity or lack, it's less about our worldview or other people, but more about our own identity. It follows us in the background of our minds and it lives in the tissues of our body. The way I see it is it's imprinted at the moment of conception when a zip file downloads from both your mother and your father's lineage simultaneously. And that initial imprint has an energetic and emotional quality. It doesn't have words yet because we don't have words yet, but it's like it's stamped on our body and consciousness. And from there, our experiences in the womb, how we experience our mother, meaning her emotional states, her consciousness, and her environment, all of that starts to shape around the original emotional and energetic imprint. We then experience life through that filter. These are our earliest distortions and conditioning. Then we're born and we start to soak up everything in our atmosphere through that filter of the core wound. Because as babies, we have no sense of self and other, inside and outside. So everything we experience in our environment is all part of the self. The insufficiency in the environment, in the atmosphere, becomes part of the identity. And then we start growing up, and somewhere around the age of 2, we learn the word no. My mom said no was my first word. So maybe some of us learned that a little earlier or later, but what's happening between 2 and 7 is the development of the ego. That's when we start to learn what is me and what is other. So sometimes you'll hear toddlers guarding their toys from other kids and they're saying, mine, right? The separation of self and other, inside and outside, starts to become clear as we grow through that developmental stage of learning separation. But by then, we've already internalized our early environment as part of our identity. So if we energetically sensed that our mother felt unsafe, for example, her sadness, her loneliness, her anger, we took all of that on as our own. We felt responsible for it way before we even knew what any of those words meant. It was a feeling, a knowing. Then, of course, we grow up, developing more and more sophisticated ways to protect a parent from threat, for example, or to keep peace in the home, or to rescue a parent from the burden of their own emotions, or to hide and be invisible to avoid the chaos and the danger, or whatever other adaptive strategies we learn to survive and feel safe. And as little kids, we also wanted our parents to feel safe because if the parents are safe, we're safe. So you see how there's layers of ongoing identity distortions coming through our conditioning, but we are none of that. We are not the wound. We are not the trauma adaptations, and we're not all the limiting programs that we were conditioned to believe about ourselves, the world, other people, and what's possible for us in life. What we all have in common. Many people feel like there's something wrong with me. That's a phrase I hear from pretty much everyone I've worked with. That's pointing to the core wound, but that phrase lacks specificity. It's the same with I'm unsafe or I feel unsafe. All core wounds have a lack of safety, but we're looking for specificity. Each core wound has something specific that you believe is wrong with you that makes you feel unsafe. And we want to discern what that is because that's what's going to lead you to your core wound. So the core wound always has a tone of scarcity and lack, and it always starts with I am or I'm not. So, for example, I'm bad means I lack goodness. I hear this from people who had a punishing or critical parent. They got blamed a lot, or sometimes parents had a lot of religious distortions that they projected on the kid as a sinner since they were really young. I'm unlovable. That's something I hear from people who typically had emotionally unavailable parents, or a parent who abandoned the kids, or a parent who had a really big rage issue. So the kid felt more hated than loved. I'm unworthy means I lack worthiness or dignity. I hear this from people who had parents who heavily shamed them instead of correcting their behavior and asking them why they did what they did. I'm not enough means I lack enoughness. I often hear this from people who had demanding parents with very high expectations. It was never enough for them to be satisfied. I don't exist means I lack existence. That tends to come from families with secrets having to do with loss and grief that was never addressed, talked about, and processed together. It was just buried. This can also be connected to cultural erasure, like genocide, that the family didn't know how to deal with, so it got frozen in the lineage. I'm powerless means I lack power. So there's often a dominating parent who made the child feel helpless, and another parent who was submissive and accommodating instead of protecting the child. Then the child feels like there's no choice in life. And this one could also be connected to cultural themes of colonization, slavery, dictatorships, invasion. I'm unwanted means I lack being wanted by others. And this often happens when the mother or father were contemplating adoption, abortion, or for some other reason, wishing they weren't having a kid. It could be as simple as poverty, like maybe it had nothing to do with the baby, but the circumstances they were living in. This is also really common in Asian culture and maybe some other cultures where the grandparents or other relatives felt disappointed or projected shame onto the mother or father for having a girl instead of a boy. I'm incapable means I lack capableness, the ability to get anything right, or I don't have what it takes. This can come from parents who feel like a failure, from parents who feel useless or incompetent. And sometimes the parent is really depressed or gave up on life, leaving this imprint on a child. So you can see how scarcity reveals its root in the core wound. There's a lack of something, and that lack becomes identity. It becomes, I am the lack of something. This is why scarcity isn't only, I don't have what I need or want. It's also, my lack of that reflects my not good enoughness, my unworthiness, my unwantedness, my unlovableness, my inexistence. And these identity distortions became the masks of the false self. And those masks further distance us from our essence, from others, from God. God is the one who knows who you truly are. It's the world that led you to believe otherwise. The core wound map. So now I want to explore the terrain of some common patterns of core wounds, as well as the related worldview beliefs, the corresponding adaptation strategies, and some vows that we might make to ourselves as a result of all the above, which keep us locked in that scarcity and lack state. So, the wound is the core pain that we want to avoid feeling. And it's always some tone of scarcity and lack that sounds like I am or I'm not. And then the worldview are the subconscious programs that help us make sense of life through the filter of our core wound and then provide us with surface defenses. Yet they're also limiting our abundance. And the adaptive strategy is what we learn to do, the behavior to keep safe, to survive, to get some of our needs met. It's that automatic behavior that kicks in when the core wound is triggered. And the vows are what we consciously decide in order to fix things, to protect ourselves from getting hurt again, or even from having the hope, because hope can feel dangerous. And these vows can also limit our abundance. The vow is organized around, I can't survive feeling like that again, so I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. So I'm going to name some core wounds here. One of these, if it resonates with you, won't just sound like a concept. It will feel like visceral gravity in your body. That's probably the one you've built your whole world around. So don't be afraid to get triggered. That's probably going to lead you to something important. And keep in mind, these are just common patterns. You may or may not identify with one or two of them, but maybe one of them spurs an idea or an insight for you that helps you identify what your particular core wound is. Or you might identify with the wound that I mentioned, but maybe your worldview, your adaptive strategy, and your vows around it might differ in some way. That's okay. This map is intended to help you see some patterns and perhaps name your own. Number one, I'm unlovable. That's the wound. The worldview could be something like love is conditional. If people see the real me, they'll leave or reject me. And the adaptive strategy here might be performance, clinging, neediness, earning love. And a vow might sound something like, I will be what they need me to be so they don't abandon me. Number two, I'm not enough. So the worldview around that wound could be there's always something more I have to reach in order to be acceptable or appreciated. Adaptive strategies could be overachieving, endless self improvement, comparison and envy. And vows might sound like, I will never stop striving so they know I'm enough. Number three, I'm too much. So the worldview around this wound might be my emotions, my needs, my presence overwhelms others. Adaptive strategies could be the suppression of your own needs and emotions, shrinking yourself, playing small, self-centering, hyper independence. Vows can sound like, I'll play small so I don't push them away. Or I won't say what I really think because they might reject me. Or I don't need anything from anyone. Number four, I'm unwanted. So the worldview around this wound could be something like, I'm not chosen, I'm never chosen, others are always preferred over me. And the adaptive strategies might be chasing after validation, self-neglect, over accommodating others, people pleasing, competing for attention. And vows might sound something like, I will prove I'm worth choosing. I will take care of others so I know I matter to them. I'll put their needs over mine. Number five, I'm bad. So the worldview around this wound might be something like, there's something fundamentally wrong with me. People know I'm broken. I ruin everything. The adaptive strategies could be self-punishing, hiding addictions and mistakes, secrecy, isolation and giving up on connection, or overcorrecting behavior to try to prove that you're good. So vows might sound something like, I will hurt myself, could be with alcohol, food, or other self-harm, so I don't hurt anyone else again. Or I'd rather just be alone so no one knows how broken I am. Number six, I'm powerless. So the worldview around this wound could be something like, I have no real control over outcomes. It's not fair. I have no choice. Adaptive strategies could be controlling everything possible or giving up entirely. And vows can sound like, I will never be helpless again. Or it could be, I'll just accept what life gives me because I can't change it. Number seven, I don't exist. So the worldview around this core wound could be something like, my presence is unnoticed or irrelevant. Adaptive strategies could be things like withdrawing, dissociating, provoking, or performing in order to be seen. And vows can sound like something like, I will disappear or force myself to be seen. Number eight, I'm a burden. So the worldview around this wound could sound something like, my existence creates problems for others, and it's all my fault or it's all their fault. Adaptive strategies could be hyper self-reliance, silence, isolation, emotional withholding, or burdening others. Vows could sound like, I got it all figured out. I don't need any help. Or I'll just keep it all to myself so I won't burden anyone else. Or I will make others feel the burden I feel so I know it's real. Number nine, I'm incapable. So the worldview around this wound could be something like, every time I do something, it only leads to disappointment, failure, inadequacy. Adaptive strategies could be something like avoiding risk or proving capableness through accomplishments, money, success, or overworking to prevent failure. Vows can sound like, I'll either not try at all, or I will never stop working hard to show them I've got what it takes, or I will be successful and rich so they know I'm capable. 10, I'm alone. So the worldview around this wound could be something like, no one's ever there with me or for me. No one has my back. Adaptive strategies could be hyper independence or chronic longing and disappointment cycles of hope and disappointment and hope and disappointment. Vows can sound something like, I have to do it all on my own, or I will rely only on myself because I can't trust anyone else. Does one of these feel familiar? Did something come up for you as you were listening to that? Maybe if it wasn't exact, maybe it started to trigger something that feels very familiar in your body. So remember that core wound, it's not just a concept, you will feel it viscerally in your body. So, underneath the core wound and the worldview programs, the adaptive strategies and vows is that emotional, energetic imprint at the root. This is the somatic echo of the wound. It's going to vary person to person. So, from what I've seen, two people could have the same core wound. Let's say I'm bad, for example, but one person has the imprint of sorrow or agony. And for another person, it could be fear. So we're not going to find the emotional, energetic imprint in the mind. We need to look to the body because that's where it lives. This is the pain that may be a little more challenging to identify because it's what we really don't want to feel. Our adaptive strategies automatically kick in to help us avoid feeling it. Our worldview interrupts to create a story that distracts us from feeling it. Our vows create a defensive stance so we can feel like we're protected from feeling the emotional and energetic imprint of the core wound. And all of that served a survival purpose because once upon a time, it helped us feel safe. But now it also gets in the way of our evolutionary path. So, if we want to heal and evolve, we've got to get to the core wound. Everything else is filtered through that. We can become aware of our behavioral adaptations and change those with willpower. We can override the state of scarcity and lack by forcing manifestation. We can make a conscious decision to redirect from scarcity to abundance, but all of that circumvents the root. The root of healing, personal and ancestral, is the core wound. The core wound is an existential wound. Our entire existence hinges upon the wound. The body and consciousness organize our entire life around it. So if one of those phrases hit you viscerally, it resonated not just cognitively, but you felt something, right? Bring that to mind, whatever that was. I'm unlovable, I don't exist, whatever that is, right? And maybe some memories start to come up of when you felt that way in the past. Notice what those memories are, right? And as that starts to surface in your awareness, tune into your body. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth, and another. And as you keep breathing naturally in through your nose and out through your mouth, just allowing your awareness to settle deeper into your body with each breath. As you bring that to mind, maybe you notice some sensations or some particular parts of your body. Notice where in your body is the contraction, the tightening, the bracing, the tension, the aching. Where does the wound live in your body? And what emotion emerges underneath those sensations? So, for example, shame, fear, sorrow, agony. If you feel anger, breathe another layer deeper. What's the more vulnerable emotion underneath the anger or the rage? That's the root. That's the somatic echo, the emotional and energetic imprint of the core wound. Once you identify it, once you look directly at it, you can stop running from it. Then instead, you can realize how it's always been there in the background with you. You just didn't notice it, or you just didn't have a name for it before. It's always been the root of your stories of scarcity and lack. It's always been what you've been avoiding or rebelling against. It's always been the filter through which you see yourself in life. In other episodes, we'll continue exploring more about transmuting the wound into medicine through the ancestral field. This is a process of unveiling, processing, metabolizing layer by layer. So you don't have to feel like you have to have it all figured out right now. Honor it with the space and the time that it needs to reveal itself. And remember, you're not alone in carrying it. It didn't start with you. There are others in your family holding the same burden. Can you imagine what it would be like to be free? Remember that healing doesn't happen by fixing the external world. It's about reclaiming and restoring the internal order and wholeness, creating inner coherence from the chaos and distortions. Our worldview programs, our adaptive strategies, and our vows function as shields, keeping us from feeling the pain of the wound. Yet they also create distortions in the field that block purpose, connection, expression, and love. These protection patterns and the core wound beneath them are what block true abundance. Keep in mind that there's usually quite a few layers of defensiveness hiding the core wound, and it's okay if it's not really clear yet. If you aren't sure what your core wound is, Start by listening to your inner dialogue for the protection programs and vows. They'll tend to show up in daily life, especially through your relational experiences or in situations that really matter to you when something doesn't go well. And when you hear something like, no one cares, the world is hostile, it's not safe to be seen, write that down because that might be one of your worldview programs that might point you toward the wound underneath it. These are the distortion echoes that you keep replaying and replaying until you reach the root, the core wound. Then you can go a little deeper. So start with the protection program or worldview that you identified. For example, it's not safe to be seen. And ask, what part of me believes it's not safe to be seen? When did that start? If I were truly seen, what do I fear would be revealed? Maybe the part of you that hides is the part that was once rejected, that felt unwanted or unworthy. Notice your adaptive strategies. How do you hide or reject yourself in order to regain a sense of control or agency over your life? What vows did you make to yourself so that you wouldn't be seen? And can you have compassion for the part of you that feels rejected in the part of you that's doing the rejecting? If you love this and you want more, stay tuned to upcoming episodes as we explore more aspects of the core wound. And if you're ready to discover and transmute your core wound into medicine so you can apply that in your contribution to others, that's all part of my 3-month Becoming You transformational journey. You'll find the link to work with me in the show notes. The wound is not your identity. It's the place where your false identity formed. And it's also where your gifts are waiting to be uncovered. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone ready to go deeper beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here below, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are because the world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You're not the wound. You are the medicine. Let the trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration Podcast. You're not broken. You're not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour. It was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom that your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.